She only asked for a glass of water, but before the night was over, the people humiliating her would discover they had just insulted the future owner of the entire restaurant chain. Rain hammered against the towering windows of Bennett and Rose Steakhouse as black luxury SUVs lined the curb outside the flagship restaurant in downtown Chicago. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections across marble floors, while wealthy investors laughed over 18-ounce Wagyu steaks and $1,000 bottles of wine. Servers in pressed black uniforms moved carefully between tables, balancing silver trays beneath the soft notes of live piano music. Everything about the restaurant whispered exclusivity, power, money, the kind of place where reservations were booked 6 months in advance, and people wore designer suits just to feel worthy of sitting near the dining room. Then the front doors opened, and the entire atmosphere shifted. Claire Bennett stepped inside wearing a rain-soaked gray hoodie, faded jeans, and cheap white sneakers darkened by puddles from the storm outside. Water dripped softly from the ends of her blonde hair onto the polished marble floor as several guests turned toward her with immediate annoyance. A man near the wine bar frowned before quietly moving his leather briefcase farther away from her path. 2 women seated beside the fireplace exchanged amused glances behind lifted champagne glasses. Claire noticed the stares immediately, but she kept her posture calm, quiet, controlled. Her hands trembled slightly from the cold as she approached the hostess stand near the entrance. Behind it stood Victoria Hale, the restaurant's regional operations manager, a tall woman in a tailored ivory suit with diamond earrings glimmering beneath the chandelier light. Victoria had spent the entire evening entertaining investors who were preparing to finalize a massive acquisition deal for the restaurant chain before midnight. Stress already tightened her expression, and the moment she saw Claire standing there in soaked clothes, something cold flashed behind her eyes. "Can I help you?" Victoria asked, though her tone made it clear she already wanted the answer to. "Be no." Claire swallowed quietly. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly. "Could I please just have a glass of water?" The words seemed to hang awkwardly in the air. A nearby couple stopped speaking long enough to glance over with visible discomfort. Victoria stared at Claire for 2 long seconds before forcing a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "This is a private dining establishment," she replied. "Not a shelter." A few guests nearby chuckled under their breath. Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, but remained polite. "I understand. I've been walking in the rain for almost an hour. I just needed a glass of water before I leave." Victoria crossed her arms slowly. "Our guests pay thousands of dollars to dine here," she said louder this time, making sure nearby tables could hear. "People don't come here to feel uncomfortable." Claire nodded once, though humiliation slowly colored her cheeks pink. "I'm not trying to bother anyone." "Then don't," Victoria answered sharply. The room grew quieter now. Even the piano player seemed softer somehow as more eyes drifted toward the scene unfolding near the entrance. Claire reached carefully into her hoodie pocket, pulling out a small gold lighter and setting it gently on the hostess counter while brushing wet hair from her face. The lighter looked old but expensive, engraved with the faded initials RB and a tiny emblem matching the restaurant logo beneath the chandeliers overhead. Victoria barely noticed it, but across the room, an older head chef carrying a tray of fillets suddenly froze mid-step when he caught sight of the object. His expression shifted instantly. Recognition. Shock. But before he could move closer, Victoria leaned forward with visible irritation. "You need to leave," she said firmly. "Now." Claire picked up the lighter again slowly. "Could I at least sit somewhere for 5 minutes until the rain slows down?" Victoria gave a short laugh, disbelief dripping from her voice. "Do you honestly think this is the kind of place where you can just walk in off the street looking like that?" Several investors near the private dining section turned fully toward Claire now, openly watching. One older man smirked into his whiskey glass. "Every city's got one," he muttered quietly to his companion. Claire heard him. Her fingers tightened slightly around the gold lighter, but she still said nothing back. The silence around her somehow made the humiliation worse. Victoria stepped around the hostess stand now, heels clicking sharply against marble as she approached Claire directly. "Listen carefully," she said in a low voice filled with practiced superiority. "Tonight is extremely important for this company. Important people are here. Wealthy people. You standing here soaking wet is embarrassing this establishment." Claire's eyes lifted slowly. "Steady." hurt but calm. I only asked for water. Victoria's expression hardened further. And I'm asking you to leave. For a moment, neither woman moved. Rain thundered softly against the windows, while dozens of wealthy strangers watched the scene like entertainment between courses. Then Claire gave a small nod. Okay, she whispered. She turned quietly toward the door, gripping the old gold lighter tightly in her hand as she stepped back into the cold Chicago rain. And not a single person inside Bennett and Rowe realized they had just sent away the woman whose name was written into the foundation of everything around them. Cold rain soaked through Claire Bennett's hoodie as she stepped beneath the awning outside Bennett and Rowe Steakhouse, the wind sweeping through downtown Chicago hard enough to make the hanging lanterns sway above the entrance. Across Michigan Avenue, headlights reflected off wet pavement, while expensive black sedans continued arriving one after another for the private investor dinner upstairs. Men in tailored cashmere coats and women draped in designer gowns disappeared through the glowing restaurant doors without ever noticing the girl standing quietly beside the stone planter near the valet stand. Claire wrapped her arms lightly around herself for warmth, her damp sneakers leaving faint watermarks against the sidewalk. Through the towering front windows, she could still see the glittering dining room inside. Crystal chandeliers shimmered over polished marble floors while servers poured wine into delicate glasses that cost more than most people's weekly grocery bills. The contrast between that world and the girl standing outside in soaked clothes could not have been sharper. Yet Claire did not look angry. She did not pound on the glass or argue with anyone. She simply stood there silently, watching, almost thoughtfully. Inside the restaurant, Victoria Hale remained near the hostess stand greeting investors with perfectly rehearsed smiles, though irritation still lingered beneath her polished expression after dealing with Claire moments earlier. Who was that? One of the investors asked casually while adjusting his silver cufflinks. Victoria gave a quiet laugh. Just someone who wandered in from the street looking for attention. The group chuckled politely. Another woman glanced toward the window where Claire's silhouette was barely visible through the rain. She is still standing out there, she noted. Victoria followed her gaze briefly before shrugging. Some people think looking pitiful earns sympathy. Her words carried the smooth confidence of someone used to judging people quickly and rarely being challenged for it. Nearby servers overheard the conversation while pretending not to. One young hostess shifted uncomfortably. She seemed polite. The girl whispered softly to another employee. But before anyone could respond, Victoria's sharp voice cut across the room again. This restaurant survives on image, she announced while straightening a menu on the podium. When wealthy clients walk through those doors, they expect elegance, not discomfort. The older head chef who had noticed Claire's gold lighter earlier remained unusually distracted in the kitchen. Twice he nearly called someone over to ask about the girl outside, but each time he stopped himself. Something about that lighter unsettled him deeply. He had seen it before years ago in the hands of Richard Bennett himself, the founder of the entire restaurant chain. But the idea that a soaked young woman in a gray hoodie could somehow be connected to the Bennett family seemed impossible. Meanwhile outside, Claire slowly sat down on a stone bench beneath the awning. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the roof only inches away from her shoes. She pulled the gold lighter from her pocket again and stared at it quietly beneath the glow of the restaurant lights. The engraved initials RB caught the reflection of passing headlights. Her thumb brushed gently across the scratched surface before she opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded with age. A little blonde girl smiling beside an older man in a flower-covered apron. Claire looked at the picture for several silent seconds before closing the lighter carefully. Inside the dining room upstairs, champagne glasses clinked as investors gathered around a massive presentation screen displaying future expansion plans for Bennett and Rowe Steakhouse. Victoria stood confidently near the front of the room explaining projected numbers, while waiters carried trays of lobster tails and filet mignon through the candlelit tables. By next quarter we expect to expand another 12 locations across the Midwest, she announced proudly. Tonight's acquisition agreement will secure the future of this company for decades. Applause followed her words. Everything felt controlled, luxurious, untouchable. Then one of the investors glanced toward the rain-covered windows overlooking the street below. Your homeless visitor is still outside, he remarked with mild amusement. Several people turned to look. Claire remained seated quietly beneath the awning, her her soaked hoodie pulled tighter against the cold wind. Victoria's expression hardened instantly. Unbelievable, she muttered under her breath. She excused herself from the investors and headed downstairs again, heels clicking sharply across the marble floors. When she pushed through the front doors, cold rain sprayed briefly into the lobby behind her. "You are still here?" she asked sharply. Claire stood immediately, calm as ever. "I am waiting for the rain to slow down before I walk farther." Victoria folded her arms tightly. "You cannot stay near the entrance. Guests are noticing you." Claire glanced toward the valet area where another luxury SUV had just arrived. "I am not bothering anyone." "You are creating an atmosphere," Victoria replied coldly. "People spend money here to avoid situations exactly like this." Claire looked at her quietly for a moment. Not defensive, not ashamed, just observant. "You think I make the restaurant look bad?" she said softly. Victoria did not hesitate. "Frankly, yes." The rain intensified between them, wind rattling the hanging lantern above the sidewalk. For a brief second, Victoria noticed how strangely composed Claire remained despite every humiliating word thrown at her. Most people would have argued by now, or cried, or begged. But Claire simply stood there holding that old gold lighter in one hand like it mattered more than anything else she owned. And somehow, that calmness unsettled Victoria far more than anger ever could. Victoria Hale stood beneath the glowing entrance lights with her arms folded tightly across her ivory blazer while rain swept sideways through the Chicago streets behind Claire Bennett. Expensive cars continued arriving at the curb every few minutes, headlights flashing across wet pavement as valets hurried to open doors beneath oversized black umbrellas. Each new guest stepping out into the golden glow of Bennett and Rowe looked polished and effortless in tailored coats, silk dresses, and shoes worth more than Claire's entire outfit combined. And every single one of them noticed her. Some only glanced briefly before looking away. Others stared openly with quiet judgment as they passed into the warmth of the restaurant. Claire remained calm through all of it. Her hoodie clung damply to her shoulders while rainwater still darkened the edges of her faded jeans, yet she stood with a quiet dignity that somehow refused to disappear no matter how cold Victoria's voice became. "I am asking one final time," Victoria said firmly. "You cannot stay near this entrance." Claire looked toward the street for a moment before answering softly. "The buses stopped running because of the storm." Victoria gave a restrained sigh, filled with impatience. "That is unfortunate, but this is not a waiting station." A wealthy older woman wearing a white fur-lined coat paused beside the valet podium while adjusting diamond bracelets around her wrist. She glanced toward Claire with visible discomfort before leaning quietly toward Victoria. "You should probably have security handle this," she whispered, though not quietly enough. "Guests are beginning to notice." Victoria nodded slightly. "I already intend to." The words settled heavily in the air. Near the doorway, two younger investors standing beneath the awning exchanged amused looks while pretending to check their phones. One of them smirked faintly. "She picked the wrong restaurant," he murmured. The other chuckled softly. Claire heard them both. But instead of reacting, she slowly reached into her hoodie pocket again and pulled out a folded cream-colored envelope, worn carefully along the edges as if it had been opened many times before. She held it gently against her chest for a moment before sliding it back into her pocket. Victoria noticed immediately. "What is that?" she asked sharply. Claire's fingers paused briefly over the envelope. "Just paperwork." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "For what exactly?" Claire looked toward the glowing restaurant sign above the entrance before answering calmly. "Something important to my grandfather." The answer only seemed to irritate Victoria further. "Look," she said, lowering her voice into something colder and more controlled. "I understand that life can be difficult, but standing outside an upscale restaurant carrying random papers is not going to solve your problems." Claire remained silent. The older woman in the white coat gave Claire another dismissive glance before shaking her head lightly. "People always think emotional stories change reality," she muttered while stepping inside. The younger investors laughed quietly again. A hush of humiliation settled over the entrance like a heavy fog. Even the valet attendants avoided looking directly at Claire now. Yet something about her composure continued to feel strange. She was too calm, too observant. Most people treated this way would have broken down by now under the weight of the stairs alone. But Claire simply stood there beneath the rain-speckled lantern light, quietly watching the restaurant as if she belonged to it in some invisible way no one else could understand. Inside the lobby, the older head chef finally emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray toward a private dining room. But the moment he saw Claire still standing outside, his pace slowed again. His eyes drifted down to the outline of the gold lighter visible in her hand. Recognition flickered across his face once more. 30 years working for Richard Bennett had taught him to notice details others ignored. And that lighter was not just expensive. It was personal. Richard Bennett never allowed anyone else to touch it. The chef stepped closer to the front doors instinctively, but Victoria noticed him immediately. "Chef Morales," she called sharply. "The investors are waiting for dessert service." The older man hesitated. "Yes, of course." But before turning away, he glanced at Claire one more time with growing unease. Outside, thunder rolled faintly above the city skyline. Claire slowly walked toward the edge of the awning and looked across the street where reflections of the restaurant shimmered against rain-covered asphalt. Then, very quietly, she asked a question that made Victoria blink in confusion. "Does the piano still play at exactly 8:15 every night?" Victoria frowned. "Excuse me." Claire kept her eyes on the glowing windows. "My grandfather used to insist on it. He said diners stayed longer when the music started after dessert." For the first time since meeting her, Victoria looked slightly unsettled. "How would you know that?" Claire finally turned toward her again. "Calm. Steady. I used to come here when I was little." Victoria almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement. "That is impossible. This restaurant has catered to elite clients for decades." Claire gave the faintest smile. Not defensive, not angry, almost sad. "Yes," she said softly. "I know." Then she looked down at the cream-colored envelope in her pocket once more, her fingertips resting gently against it as the rain continued falling around her, and the glowing restaurant behind Victoria carried on as if the quiet girl standing outside could never possibly matter at all. The rain finally began slowing to a cold, steady drizzle, but the tension outside Bennett and Rose Steakhouse only grew heavier. Through the towering front windows, Claire Bennett could see the private investor dinner reaching its most important moment of the evening. Men in dark tailored suits gathered near the upstairs balcony overlooking the dining room, while waiters poured champagne beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Every few seconds another burst of laughter drifted faintly through the glass, mixing with the soft piano music Richard Bennett himself had once insisted be played at exactly 8:15 every night. Claire stood quietly beneath the awning with one hand resting inside the pocket of her hoodie, her fingertips touching the folded cream-colored envelope again. Across from her, Victoria Hale's patience had completely disappeared. The calm composure Claire carried somehow irritated her more with every passing minute. "I do not understand why you are still here," Victoria said sharply. "You have already been told multiple times that this is private property." Claire looked toward the rain-covered street. "I am waiting for someone." Victoria let out a disbelieving laugh. "Someone?" Her eyes swept slowly over Claire's soaked clothes again. "No offense, but nobody attending tonight's event is looking for someone dressed like that." A nearby valet attendant lowered his eyes awkwardly. Two investors stepping outside for cigars paused near the entrance, immediately sensing tension. One of them adjusted his gold watch while studying Claire with quiet amusement. "Everything all right here?" he asked Victoria casually. Victoria forced a professional smile. "Just handling a small issue." The investor glanced toward Claire's damp sneakers and hoodie before smirking lightly. "Chicago weather brings out all kinds." The other man chuckled softly beside him. Claire remained silent through it all. Not embarrassed, not angry, just still. That stillness continued unsettling everyone around her in ways none of them could explain. Most people in her situation would have walked away long ago under the weight of the humiliation alone. But Claire stayed exactly where she was, watching the restaurant with calm eyes that seemed strangely familiar with every detail of the building. Finally, Victoria turned toward the security guard standing near the valet podium. "Marcus," she said firmly, "I need you to escort her off the property." The words landed hard in the cold night air. Several nearby guests glanced over immediately. The young hostess inside the lobby froze in place behind the podium, while the older head chef watched quietly from the kitchen doorway farther back. Marcus, a tall security guard in a black overcoat, stepped forward carefully. Unlike Victoria, his expression carried hesitation rather than hostility. "Ma'am," he said politely to Claire, "I am going to have to ask you to move farther down the block." Claire looked at him calmly. "Even if I am waiting for family?" Victoria crossed her arms instantly. "Family." Her tone sharpened with disbelief. "This restaurant serves executives, investors, and public figures. Stop pretending you belong connected to this place." One of the cigar-smoking investors laughed openly now. Maybe she thinks she owns stock. More quiet laughter followed from nearby guests. The humiliation deepened without anyone needing to raise their voice. Claire slowly removed her hand from her hoodie pocket. The old gold lighter rested gently in her palm beneath the entrance lights, its engraved initials catching a faint reflection from the chandeliers behind the glass. Chef Morales noticed it again immediately from inside. This time his face lost color completely. Victoria saw his reaction, but misunderstood it entirely. "Exactly," she said coldly, nodding toward the lighter. "I have been wondering about that all night." Claire looked down at the lighter quietly. Victoria stepped closer. "Do you honestly expect anyone to believe something like that belongs to you?" The accusation hung carefully beneath her words without ever becoming direct. Claire closed the lighter softly with a metallic click that somehow echoed louder than the rain itself. "It belonged to my grandfather," she answered. Victoria's expression hardened further. "Enough." She gestured toward the street. "You are making our guests uncomfortable. This restaurant has standards." Claire finally lifted her eyes fully to Victoria then. Calm, steady, unshaken despite every insult layered carefully around her all evening. "Standards matter," Claire said softly. "That is why my grandfather built this place for people who respected others before they judged them." For the first time since meeting her, Victoria looked momentarily speechless. The investors exchanged brief, confused glances. Even Marcus hesitated beside the entrance. Claire's voice had not risen. She had not sounded defensive. But something about the certainty in her words cut through the atmosphere like a crack spreading quietly through glass. Then one of the upstairs servers suddenly pushed through the front doors in visible panic. "Victoria," he said breathlessly. "The board members just arrived unexpectedly." Victoria turned immediately, grateful for the interruption. "Good. Get everyone upstairs." The server nodded quickly, but before returning inside, his eyes landed briefly on Claire and widened slightly. He had recognized the Bennett family photograph visible for just a second inside the gold lighter before Claire closed it again. Claire noticed his reaction, but said nothing. Victoria straightened her blazer sharply before looking back toward Marcus. "Please remove her before the board sees this." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am," he said carefully to Claire, "I really do not want to cause trouble." Claire gave him a faint, understanding smile. "You are not the one causing it." The words landed quietly, but somehow every person standing beneath the glowing entrance lights felt the weight behind them. And somewhere deep inside the restaurant, hidden beyond the laughter of investors and the clinking of champagne glasses, the truth was already moving closer. The atmosphere outside Bennett and Rose Steakhouse shifted subtly after Claire Bennett's quiet words, though no one wanted to admit it. Rain still tapped softly against the black awning above the entrance while downtown Chicago glowed silver and gold beneath the storm clouds. Inside the restaurant, the investor dinner continued beneath chandeliers and candlelight, but near the front entrance, tension lingered like static in the air. Victoria Hale stood perfectly still for a moment, watching Claire more carefully now. Something about the girl's calm confidence no longer matched the image she had built in her mind earlier that evening. Yet pride kept Victoria from backing down. "Marcus," she said finally, her voice colder than before, "please finish handling this." The security guard hesitated again. "Ma'am," he said gently to Claire, "there is a covered train station about 2 blocks south if you need somewhere dry." Claire nodded politely. "Thank you." She started to step away from the entrance, but as she adjusted the folded cream-colored envelope beneath her arm, the corner slipped loose for half a second. Marcus caught sight of an embossed gold logo pressed into the paper. His eyes narrowed slightly. Bennett Holdings. Before he could look closer, Claire carefully tucked the envelope back inside her hoodie pocket. Across the entrance, Victoria noticed Marcus's expression immediately. "What is it?" she asked sharply. Marcus hesitated. "Nothing." But it clearly was not nothing. Inside the restaurant lobby, the young hostess behind the podium quietly opened the reservation system on her tablet, still unsettled by everything she had witnessed. Almost absent-mindedly, she typed the name Claire Bennett into the internal guest search. The screen instantly froze for 1 second before flashing a restricted profile marked Executive Access Only. The hostess blinked in confusion. Employees at her level were never supposed to see executive profiles connected to ownership records. She stared at the screen again. Claire Bennett. Access locked by corporate administration. Her stomach tightened. Before she could process what it meant, Victoria walked back inside from the entrance. "Why are you standing there?" she asked impatiently. The hostess quickly lowered the tablet. "Sorry, I was checking reservations." Victoria barely listened. Her attention drifted toward the front windows where Claire slowly walked a few feet away from the entrance lights, still holding the old gold lighter in one hand. Rain shimmered around her beneath the city glow. She looked strangely familiar standing there now, not because of her clothes or face alone, but because of the quiet certainty she carried, as if she had spent years inside those walls long before anyone else currently working there. Upstairs, several members of the corporate board had finally arrived for the acquisition meeting. Expensive leather portfolios lined the long private dining table, while investors reviewed documents worth hundreds of millions of dollars. One silver-haired board member glanced toward the downstairs entrance through the balcony railing. "What is happening down there?" he asked casually. Victoria forced a smile as she approached the staircase. Just a minor disturbance outside. But before she could continue upward, Chef Morales stepped quietly beside her. "Victoria," he said in a low voice, "that young woman outside." Victoria immediately sighed. "Please do not start this again." The older chef lowered his voice even further. "I knew Richard Bennett for 30 years. That lighter she carries belonged to him." Victoria's expression hardened instantly. "You are imagining things." "I am not." The chef looked genuinely unsettled now. "I remember it clearly. He kept a photograph inside." Victoria folded her arms defensively. "Richard Bennett has been dead for 6 hours. Emotions are running high tonight. That girl probably found some old lighter at a pawn shop and made up a story." Yet even as she spoke, uncertainty had begun quietly creeping beneath her confidence. Outside, Claire stood near the edge of the valet lane, watching rainwater flow along the curb. Her phone vibrated softly inside her hoodie pocket. She answered after a moment. "Hello." The voice on the other end sounded urgent but respectful. "Miss Bennett, this is Daniel Reeves from Bennett Holdings Legal Counsel. We have been trying to reach you for over an hour." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "I know. The board is asking for you directly now. The acquisition cannot move forward until you arrive upstairs." Claire glanced back through the massive restaurant windows where Victoria stood partially hidden beneath the chandelier light. "I am already here," she answered softly. Daniel Reeves fell silent for 2 seconds. "You are at the flagship location?" "Yes." "Then please stay exactly where you are. We are on our way downstairs." Claire nodded once before ending the call calmly. She slipped the phone back into her pocket without changing expression. Nearby, Marcus had overheard only fragments of the conversation, but one phrase echoed clearly in his mind. "The board is asking for you directly now." He looked toward Claire differently after that. Not with pity anymore. With confusion. Inside the lobby, the young hostess slowly approached Victoria holding the tablet with nervous hands. "Ms. Hale." Victoria looked irritated. "What now?" The hostess swallowed carefully. "I searched her name in the system." Victoria frowned immediately. "Why would you do that?" "Because," the hostess lowered her voice. Her profile triggered executive ownership restrictions. Silence. Victoria stared at her for a moment without blinking. Then she laughed quietly, though the sound carried far less confidence than before. "There must be another Claire Bennett." But even as she said it, her eyes drifted involuntarily toward the rain-covered girl outside, holding the gold lighter beneath the glowing entrance lights of the restaurant her grandfather had built. The tension inside Bennett and Rowe Steakhouse thickened by the minute as whispers quietly spread through the lobby. Rain still shimmered against the towering windows while luxury cars lined the curb outside. But now employees were no longer simply staring at Claire Bennett with judgment alone. Confusion had entered the room. Dangerous confusion. The young hostess stood frozen behind the reservation podium, clutching her tablet tightly against her chest, while Victoria Hale stared at her with growing irritation. "Let me see it," Victoria demanded. The hostess hesitated before slowly handing over the tablet. Victoria scanned the screen quickly. Her expression changed for half a second before she forced control back into her face. Executive ownership restrictions. Claire Bennett. Internal access only. Victoria immediately locked the screen and handed the tablet back. It is obviously some kind of clerical error, she said sharply. Reset the system. The hostess nodded nervously, though doubt remained all over her face. Nearby employees had already begun quietly noticing the exchange. Two servers standing near the wine station exchanged uneasy looks, while Marcus remained near the entrance watching Claire more carefully than before. Outside beneath the awning, Claire stood calmly beside the stone planter while city lights reflected off the wet street around her. She did not appear nervous. She did not appear surprised. She simply waited. And somehow that quiet patience unsettled Victoria more with every passing second. Upstairs, members of the corporate board continued gathering in the private dining room while investors waited impatiently for final acquisition paperwork to begin. One board member descended halfway down the staircase looking irritated. "Victoria," he called, "where is Daniel Reeves?" Legal counsel said he was already here. Victoria forced a tight smile. "I am sure he is handling something related to the estate transition." The words made Chef Morales glance sharply toward Claire again. Estate transition. The old chef slowly wiped his hands against his white apron, his mind racing now. Richard Bennett had died only hours earlier. The board was searching for an heir, and somehow a young woman named Bennett carrying Richard's personal lighter was standing outside in the rain while ownership restrictions appeared beside her name in the company system. Suddenly, the impossible no longer seemed impossible at all. Outside, Claire quietly removed the cream-colored envelope from her hoodie pocket again. This time she carefully opened it beneath the entrance light. Marcus noticed immediately. So did several nearby employees through the front windows. Inside the envelope rested legal documents stamped with the gold seal of Bennett Holdings Corporate Counsel. Claire calmly unfolded the top page while rain tapped softly against the awning overhead. Victoria's eyes narrowed the moment she saw the seal. She pushed through the front doors immediately. "What exactly are you doing now?" she asked coldly. Claire looked down at the papers. Waiting became unnecessary. Victoria stepped closer. "Those documents are private corporate materials." Claire raised her eyes slowly. "Yes, they are." Something about the answer sent a flicker of unease through Marcus beside them. Victoria extended her hand sharply. "Let me see them." Claire did not move. "I do not think that is appropriate." Victoria's composure cracked slightly for the first time all night. "This entire situation has become ridiculous," she snapped, loud enough now for nearby guests to hear. "You walk in here soaked from the street carrying stolen corporate papers and expect people to believe you belong connected to this company." The sidewalk fell strangely quiet. Even the valet attendants stopped moving for a moment. Claire carefully folded the documents again without responding. Victoria mistook the silence for weakness. "I have spent 10 years building relationships for this restaurant chain," she continued sharply. "I know every executive tied to Bennett Holdings. And I can assure you nobody connected to this company would ever show up looking like this." Her eyes swept deliberately over Claire's damp hoodie and worn sneakers. Several wealthy guests standing beneath the awning nearby watched openly now, drawn toward the confrontation like spectators waiting for a final embarrassing scene. One woman quietly shook her head. "This is becoming uncomfortable." But Victoria no longer cared. Pride had pushed her too far to step back gracefully. "Marcus," she said firmly, "call the police if necessary. I want her removed before the board sees this." The words hit the air hard enough to silence nearly everyone around them. Claire slowly looked toward Victoria again. Calm, almost sad. Then very gently, she placed the old gold lighter on the stone valet podium between them. The engraved initials RB gleamed beneath the entrance lights. For the first time, every eye focused fully on it. Chef Morales stepped forward from inside the lobby, unable to stay silent anymore. "That lighter belonged to Richard Bennett," he said quietly. No one moved. Victoria turned toward him sharply. "Chef, stop this nonsense." But the older man's expression remained fixed on Claire. "I gave that lighter to Richard 27 years ago after we opened the first location together." The room went still. Claire slowly reached into the cream-colored envelope again and removed a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. The key looked old, worn smooth with time. Stamped across the metal were 4 tiny engraved words. Found her private office. Marcus stared at it immediately. So did Chef Morales. Victoria's face lost color for the briefest second before pride forced her forward again. Anybody could make a copy of an old key, she said quickly. But her voice no longer carried the same certainty. Claire gently placed the brass key beside the lighter on the valet podium. Then she looked directly at Victoria and spoke in the same calm voice she had carried all night. You should probably call Daniel Reeves now, she said softly, before the board realizes who you left standing outside in the rain. And for the first time since the evening began, nobody around them laughed. Silence settled over the entrance of Bennett and Rowe Steakhouse so completely that even the rain against the sidewalk seemed quieter. The old brass key and gold lighter rested side by side on the valet podium beneath the warm entrance lights, while every employee, investor, and guest standing nearby stared at Claire Bennett differently now. No one laughed anymore. No one smirked at her soaked hoodie or worn sneakers. The atmosphere had shifted into something uncertain, fragile. Victoria Hale stood frozen beside the front doors, her confidence slipping further with every passing second. This is absurd, she said finally, though her voice no longer carried the same authority. You expect everyone here to believe some random girl standing in the rain somehow belongs connected to the Bennett family? Claire did not answer immediately. She simply looked toward the glowing dining room through the towering windows, her expression calm beneath the drifting rain. Then headlights swept across the street outside as 3 black executive sedans pulled sharply to the curb in front of the restaurant. The valet attendants straightened instantly. Marcus stepped aside automatically. Every conversation near the entrance stopped. The rear doors opened almost simultaneously, and several men and women in dark overcoats stepped out carrying leather portfolios beneath umbrellas. At the center was Daniel Reeves, chief legal counsel for Bennett Holdings. The moment he saw Claire standing beneath the awning, relief flooded across his face. Miss Bennett, he said immediately, crossing the sidewalk toward her. Thank God. The entire entrance went silent. Victoria blinked once, visibly confused. Daniel Reeves stopped directly in front of Claire, ignoring everyone else around them. We have been searching for you for over an hour, he said respectfully. The board refuses to finalize the succession meeting until you are present. Claire gave a small nod. I know. Daniel glanced toward the old lighter and brass key resting on the valet podium before looking back at her with sympathy. I am deeply sorry about your grandfather. Claire's eyes softened slightly for the first time all evening. Thank you. Behind them, Victoria's face had gone pale beneath the entrance lights. Wait, she interrupted carefully. There must be some misunderstanding. Daniel slowly turned toward her. His expression hardened almost instantly after noticing Claire's soaked clothes and the tension hanging around the entrance. Who are you? He asked. Victoria Hale, Regional Operations Manager. Daniel studied her silently for one uncomfortable moment. Then his eyes moved toward Marcus, the uneasy employees inside the lobby, and finally back toward Claire standing in the rain. Understanding dawned across his face piece by piece. Miss Bennett has been outside this entire time? Nobody answered immediately. That silence told him everything. Victoria tried to recover quickly. We did not know who she was. Claire remained calm beside them, offering no accusation, no dramatic interruption. She simply stood quietly while the truth unfolded around her on its own. Daniel exhaled slowly, visibly disturbed now. Richard Bennett personally amended his will 6 months ago, he said carefully, loud enough for the surrounding guests and employees to hear. As of tonight, Claire Bennett is the sole inheritor of Bennett Holdings, including every Bennett and Rowe property nationwide. The words landed like thunder beneath the awning. One of the investors near the cigar stand lowered his drink completely. The hostess inside the lobby covered her mouth in shock. Chef Morales closed his eyes briefly as realization finally settled fully across his face. Victoria looked physically unable to process what she had just heard. No, she whispered faintly. Daniel opened one of the leather portfolios and carefully removed several documents stamped with the official Bennett Holdings seal. The board meeting upstairs exists for one purpose tonight, he continued. To formally transfer controlling ownership of the company to Miss Claire Bennett. Rainwater dripped quietly from the edge of Claire's hoodie sleeve onto the marble entrance floor while every person around her stared in complete silence. The same wealthy guests who had avoided eye contact earlier now looked almost embarrassed to meet her gaze. One investor quietly straightened his tie. Another stepped awkwardly backward. The atmosphere of superiority that had filled the restaurant all evening vanished completely beneath the weight of the revelation. Victoria's lips parted slightly as she struggled to regain composure. "Miss Bennet," she began weakly. "If we had known." Claire gently interrupted her. "That is the problem." Her voice remained soft, controlled, but every person listening felt the weight behind those 4 words. Claire picked up the old gold lighter from the valet podium and turned it slowly in her hand. "My grandfather spent 40 years building restaurants where people were supposed to feel welcome," she said quietly. "He used to tell me that you can learn everything about a person by watching how they treat someone who cannot offer them anything in return." No one moved. No one spoke. Even the traffic noise from downtown Chicago seemed distant now beneath the stillness surrounding the entrance. Daniel Reeves looked visibly uncomfortable as he glanced toward Victoria. "Miss Bennet," he said carefully, "the board is waiting upstairs whenever you are ready." Claire nodded once. Then, without arrogance or revenge in her expression, she picked up the brass key beside the lighter and handed it gently to Chef Morales. "Could you open my grandfather's office for me?" she asked softly. The older chef's eyes filled instantly. "Of course," he whispered. Around them, the entire atmosphere of the restaurant had transformed completely. The same girl who had been treated like an embarrassment only minutes earlier now stood at the center of the company's future while executives, investors, and employees watched her with stunned respect. And Victoria Hale, the woman who had judged her worth by a rain-soaked hoodie and a pair of worn sneakers, stood speechless beneath the glowing entrance lights of the empire Claire Bennet now owned. The entire atmosphere inside Bennett and Rowe Steakhouse had changed by the time Claire Bennet finally stepped through the front entrance. Only 20 minutes earlier, guests had looked at her soaked hoodie and worn sneakers with quiet judgment. Now the same investors, executives, and employees instinctively moved aside to clear a path for her without being asked. The marble floors reflected the chandelier light around her as silence followed each step she took into the lobby. Claire did not walk with arrogance. She did not suddenly change her posture or demand attention. If anything, she looked almost uncomfortable with the sudden shift in how people treated her. Daniel Reeves walked respectfully beside her carrying the legal documents, while Chef Morales held the old brass key carefully in his weathered hand. Behind them, Victoria Hale remained near the entrance, visibly shaken. She looked as though the ground beneath her carefully controlled world had disappeared completely. Upstairs, the private dining room had fallen into stunned quiet as word spread rapidly among the investors. The acquisition meeting had stopped entirely. Champagne glasses sat untouched beside expensive leather portfolios while board members whispered to one another in disbelief. Some glanced nervously toward the staircase, waiting for Claire to appear. Others quietly replayed the evening in their minds, remembering the comments made near the entrance only an hour earlier. The wealthy investor who had laughed about Claire standing outside now stared into his untouched whiskey glass with visible embarrassment. Even the woman in the white fur-lined coat avoided making eye contact with anyone. Claire paused near the staircase and looked across the dining room slowly. The restaurant still glowed with elegance and wealth exactly as it had earlier that night, but now she noticed details that carried memories instead of intimidation. The piano near the fireplace, the black and white photographs along the walls, the scent of garlic butter and fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. Her grandfather had built all of it from a single-family restaurant decades earlier. And tonight, after his death, she had stood outside in the rain while people inside decided her worth within seconds of seeing her clothes. Victoria finally stepped forward carefully, her heels softer now against the marble floor. "Miss Bennet," she said quietly. The room instinctively listened. Claire turned toward her calmly. Victoria's perfectly controlled expression had disappeared. "I owe you an apology," she continued, her voice tight with humiliation. "I made assumptions about you that were completely unfair." Claire remained silent, allowing her to continue. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly before speaking again. "I judged you by how you looked instead of how you carried yourself. And I embarrassed both you and this company in front of guests and employees." The words were difficult for her to say. Everyone could hear it. But for the first time all evening, there was no arrogance left in her voice. Only regret. Around the dining room, employees watched quietly. Some looked sympathetic toward Claire. Others looked ashamed for staying silent earlier when the humiliation began. Marcus stood near the valet entrance with his hands folded respectfully in front of him, while the young hostess looked moments away from tears. Claire studied Victoria for a long moment before answering softly. "Tonight was not really about me." Victoria looked confused. Claire glanced around the dining room. "There are people treated this way every single day who never turn out to own the building they walk into." The room went completely still again. No one moved. No one spoke. Claire's voice never rose above. Calm conversation, yet every word landed with quiet force. "My grandfather grew up with almost nothing," she continued. "He opened his first restaurant because he believed people deserved warmth before judgment. He used to tell me that good food means nothing if people leave feeling small." Chef Morales lowered his eyes quietly beside her. Several older employees nodded faintly, remembering Richard Bennett saying those exact words years ago. Claire looked back toward Victoria gently. "You saw what clothes and assumed I had no value here." Victoria swallowed hard. "I know." Claire gave a small nod. "But dignity is not something people put on with expensive coats." The silence deepened around the room. One investor quietly removed his cigar from the table without lighting it. Another shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The atmosphere no longer felt like a corporate dinner. It felt like a lesson no one expected to receive. Daniel Reeves stepped forward carefully. "Miss Bennett," he said, "the board is prepared whenever you are ready to begin the ownership transfer." Claire glanced toward the staircase leading upstairs. Then she surprised everyone by turning back toward the young hostess near the reservation podium. "Could someone please bring hot tea for the employees working the entrance tonight?" she asked softly. The hostess blinked in surprise. "Of course." Claire smiled faintly. "And maybe a towel. I am still dripping on the marble floors." A few nervous laughs finally broke the tension throughout the dining room. Even Marcus smiled slightly beneath his serious expression. The crushing weight hanging over the restaurant began easing for the first time all evening. But Victoria remained standing silently beside the entrance, fully aware that the lesson Claire had delivered without anger would stay with her far longer than humiliation ever could. And as Claire Bennett finally walked upstairs toward the boardroom carrying nothing but a worn hoodie, an old gold lighter, and the quiet dignity her grandfather once admired most, everyone inside Bennett and Rowe understood something they had forgotten long ago. The true measure of a person has never been the clothes they wear when they walk through the door. Nearly 2 hours later, the lights inside the private boardroom on the top floor of Bennett and Rowe Steakhouse still glowed against the rain-dark Chicago skyline. Leather portfolios remained open across the polished walnut table while attorneys, investors, and board members sat in complete silence watching Claire Bennett sign the final ownership documents beside Daniel Reeves. The gold seal of Bennett Holdings reflected beneath the chandelier light as her signature settled carefully onto the final page. Claire placed the pen down quietly. No dramatic speech followed. No celebration. Only silence. The same people who had spent the evening discussing expansion deals and acquisition percentages now looked at the young woman in the gray hoodie with something far deeper than business respect. They looked at her with humility. Daniel closed the final folder carefully. As of 11:42 p.m., he announced softly, "Claire Bennett is officially acting owner and majority controlling shareholder of Bennett Holdings and all Bennett and Rowe properties nationwide." The room remained still for one long moment before the board members slowly rose to their feet. Not because protocol required it, because somehow standing felt appropriate. Claire nodded politely, though the attention clearly made her uncomfortable. Through the massive windows behind her, rain continued sliding down the glass while the city lights shimmered far below like scattered gold across the streets. For a brief second, Claire allowed herself to breathe. Her grandfather was gone. The company was now hers. And somehow the first hours of that responsibility had begun with her standing outside her own restaurant in the rain, asking for a glass of water. Downstairs, the atmosphere throughout the restaurant remained unusually quiet. Employees moved carefully between tables while investors spoke in lowered voices. The entire building seemed changed by what had happened that night. Marcus now personally held the front doors open for guests with a warmth that had not gone unnoticed. The young hostess smiled differently at people entering from the storm. Even they Wealthy investors who had mocked Claire earlier seemed smaller somehow beneath the restaurant's golden lights. Near midnight, Claire finally descended the staircase from the boardroom, carrying the cream-colored envelope beneath one arm and the old gold lighter in her hand. Conversations faded instantly as people noticed her approaching. Victoria Hale stood near the lobby beside the hostess podium, waiting quietly. She looked exhausted now, stripped completely of the polished confidence she carried earlier that evening. When Claire reached the bottom of the stairs, Victoria stepped forward carefully. "Miss Bennet," she said softly. Claire stopped. Victoria struggled briefly to find words. "I spent years believing success meant protecting appearances," she admitted quietly. "Tonight, I realized I forgot how to see people." The honesty in her voice surprised everyone nearby. Claire studied her calmly for a moment before answering. "People make mistakes." Victoria nodded faintly. "But not everyone gets the chance to learn from them." Claire glanced around the restaurant slowly. Employees watched from behind the hostess stand, the wine station, and the kitchen doors. Some nervous, some hopeful. Chef Morales stood near the dining room entrance with tired eyes and folded hands while the piano near the fireplace played softly in the background exactly at the volume Richard Bennett always preferred. Finally, Claire spoke. "My grandfather believed restaurants were never really about food," she said gently. "He said they were about how people feel while they are inside them." No one interrupted. "So starting tomorrow," Claire continued, "every Bennett and Rowe location will begin employee hospitality retraining. Not for customers." Her eyes drifted calmly across the room. For everyone. The words settled deeply into the silence around her. Marcus lowered his eyes thoughtfully. The young hostess blinked back tears. Even several investors quietly nodded. Claire then surprised everyone again by turning toward Victoria. "You built strong business relationships for this company," she said. "That still matters." Victoria looked stunned. "You are not firing me." Claire paused. Briefly, "I think learning matters more than humiliation." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Softer. Human. Victoria's eyes filled instantly with emotion she clearly had not expected to feel. "Thank you," she whispered. Claire gave a small nod before stepping toward the front entrance. Marcus immediately moved to open the doors for her, but this time he did so with genuine respect rather than obligation. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The wet Chicago streets reflected silver beneath the city lights, while cool night air drifted softly beneath the awning. Claire paused just outside the doorway and looked back one final time at the restaurant her grandfather had built from almost nothing decades earlier. The chandelier glow spilled warmly across the marble floor behind her, while employees and guests stood quietly watching. Claire slowly placed the old brass key into Chef Morales's hand. "Keep the office exactly the way he left it," she said softly. The older chef nodded with tears in his eyes. "I will." Claire smiled faintly, then slipped the gold lighter into her hoodie pocket before stepping away from the entrance and into the quiet city night. Behind her, no one moved for several seconds. No one spoke. They simply watched the young woman they once judged by wet clothes and worn sneakers walk calmly down the sidewalk, carrying herself with more dignity than anyone inside the building had shown all evening. And that night, beneath the fading glow of Bennett and Rowe Steakhouse, everyone who witnessed what happened remembered something wealth often makes people forget. The most important thing a person can wear is the way they treat others when they believe no one important is watching.